Right, so hello and welcome. It's a pleasure to see all of you here today for this workshop. Without further ado, actually, I'd like to get us started. So I can get the next slide. There we go. So first, I'd like to introduce today's presenters and moderators. And so when I call everyone's name, please sort of unmute yourselves and say hello. Ashton Ham.
Hi, everyone.
Chase Robinson.
Hey, everyone.
Christian Rutherford. Gabriel Sira.
Hi, everyone.
Martha Criley.
Hi there.
Matthew Okazaki.
Hi, everybody.
Palmira Yaraki, that's me. Hello. Heki is actually having some issues right now. Kilian Riano.
Hi, everyone.
And Shaheen Rudbari.
Hi, everybody.
So that's us. We are a motley crew of practitioners and academics with varying levels of experience and varying levels of expertise on the topic we're presenting on today. What has brought us together is our work with the Cooperative Network Group of the Architectural Lobby. The Architectural Lobby is an organization of architectural workers advocating for the value of architecture in the general public and for architectural work within the discipline. The lobby is organized as a decentralized network of chapters across the United States, but also in Australia and Canada. The Cooperative Network Group researches and advocates for worker ownership structures in architectural practice to increase equity, diversity, and resilience within the profession. But that's not quite the whole story. And the 10 of us here today are also not the only members of the group. I'd like to point out the work that will be presented here today has been assembled collectively by today's presenters and moderators and by other members of the Co-op Network Group over the past few years with the help of many others. The Cooperative Network Group was created a few years ago as a complement and counterpoint to the Architectural Lobby's longstanding unionization group. The idea being that unionization made sense for large firms while where collective bargaining could be most effective, whereas cooperativization made more sense for small firms. But over the years, the group has grown to think much more broadly about the cooperative model. And today's workshop is an attempt to introduce you to that broader line of thinking. So we have come to believe that co-ops can truly restructure the way we conceive of relationships with others by defying the culture of relentless sort of competition that capitalism imposes on us. So I'll stop here since we'll spend the next 3 hours talking about all this, and I'll quickly go through the schedule for today. So we're currently doing introductions, part one. We're currently doing introductions that will be followed by part one presentations. Part one will last about an hour. Times here are approximate, of course, but we will really try to stick to the schedule. And one thing we'll definitely stick to is part two will start at 4:30. So the break is sort of a fungible time frame. After the presentations, which will be sort of a bombardment of information, we'll take this break. That break sort of will vary, and then people will get to choose during that break a breakout room to join for part two, which is the workshop component of today's workshop. There will be 5 breakout groups, and they will each meet for 1 hour. After that hour, we will reconvene as a large group for part 3, which is the open forum. During part 3, we'll start by summarizing what each breakout group discussed, and then we'll launch into a conversation that's open to everybody. A few guidelines for each part of today's workshop. So during part one, please stay muted at all times. If you have any questions, you can type them in the chat. We will answer them in the chat. Feel free to have your cameras on or off as you please, but know that we will be sharing a presentation like we're doing right now on the screen. So there won't be much opportunity to see people's faces except the active speakers. During parts 2 and 3, however, we would really like to encourage everybody to turn their cameras on because we want to have an interactive and Socratic format of conversation. I still ask you to please stay muted unless you're speaking to avoid a lot of background noise. But other than that, we really, really want you to actively participate. So unmute yourself and sort of participate in the conversation. One last thing, and we'll explain this again, we'll be using progressive stack to keep track of who would like to speak. If you're not familiar with the system, it's very simple. Basically, if you'd like to speak, you just type stack in the chat. The session moderator will call on you in the order in which you signed up to speak. unless there are people whose voices haven't been heard in the conversation, in which case the moderator reserves the right to prioritize those speakers. And like I said, we'll go over these procedures in the breakout rooms again. This is a very quick, it's like a rough overview of the structure of part 1. We'll go through why cooperatives, co-ops in the world, co-ops in architecture, co-ops in community, and we'll end with co-ops in academia. And then you see to the right, the people that will sort of be contributing to each one of those presentation topics. And this is the breakdown for part 2. You received a link to a survey earlier today. ProPrac, as you can see here, will be moderated by Palmira and Matthew. Studio will be moderated by Killian and Martha. Theory by Peggy and Christian. Research by Shaheen and Chase. And practice by Ashton and Gabe. Again, you all received a survey link this morning about declaring which breakout room you want to join. This is the link to it again, and there's also a 2D barcode that you can scan to get to the survey. I want to emphasize that barring technological issues, you should be able to freely choose the breakout room you want to join. We issued this survey in advance to get a sense of how many people will be attending each breakout session in order to sort of plan better for those types of conversations. And with that, let's get started.
Hi, everyone. So again, my name is Martha, and together with Chase and Gabe, we'll be talking generally about why cooperatives are a great model to consider. So first off, what is a cooperative? The International Cooperative Alliance defines a cooperative as an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. In other words, cooperatives are created by people who have a specific need and who are willing to work together to operate and organize a company that will meet that need. One model that we'll be focusing on specifically in the next few slides is the worker-owned co-op, where workers own the business and they participate in its financial success. Workers have representation and they adhere to the principle, one worker, one vote. So we want to give a few examples of why the cooperative model is helpful in different scenarios. And I'll start by speaking about my own experience and what brought me to cooperatives in the first place. So I'm a recent graduate, but I'm really concerned with business instability and being the first in line for layoffs, which is something that we see whenever there's a recession. I'm disillusioned with traditional business structures where entry-level employees contribute a great deal of labor, but often receive a relatively small share of profit and acknowledgement. And finally, I'm interested in helping communities and not just working to maximize profit. So how do cooperatives solve these problems? Well, the cooperative is a resilient structure that empowers everyone to do their best work. It has been shown that co-ops fare better during recessions. Co-ops flatten hierarchy and distribute profit as determined collectively by all employees. And decisions are made democratically, so worker owners develop and agree upon a shared set of values and ethics.
Okay, so this is a small sample of my background. I have 7 years of professional experience, but I've had issues with burnout because so much of my time is spent carrying out tedious tasks. In the construction industry, there are tight budgets and deadlines in an effort to maximize profits. So often quality design is put on the back burner. Although the labor of lower level employees is essential to business success, we have little to no say on how to improve the business or advocate for our needs. So this is how a cooperative could resolve these issues. Tasks would be rotated so the burden is shared equally. This would give a sense of heightened satisfaction, therefore boosting morale and camaraderie in the office. The structure of co-ops creates a more productive workplace. Combining the workforce with management saves time and money that would otherwise be used for training and monitoring. And shared ownership means individual members cannot control the business to its detriment. Okay, so in this scenario, we'll take a look at how a cooperative could benefit a firm owner considering retirement. The owner does not have a succession plan, but wants the business to continue. It's clear that there's a shift taking place in our demographics as many baby boomer business owners are near the age of retirement. These businesses are at risk of either being closed or being sold to out-of-state buyers or private equity firms. The owner wants the business to remain in the community. However, buyers likely do not have a stake in the community, so jobs may be relocated or the entire business could be relocated. If a business closes or is sold, employees may lose their jobs. This is what cooperatives could do. Selling to employees to create a worker-owned co-op is a way to create a succession plan without resorting to out-of-state buyers or equity firms. This keeps the business in the community. A co-op model would protect employees, now worker owners, from business closure or layoffs by new management.
Now, this is a slightly different scenario where we're looking at a small firm rather than an individual. Small firms often struggle to compete with larger firms. In the United States, 76% of firms are 1 to 9 people, yet they capture only 14% of architecture billings. Small firms have administrative, legal, and marketing tasks, but are often unable to afford specialists in these areas. And fewer people often means a smaller network. So it's harder to find projects for which you are qualified, but they're outside of your operational reach, so you can't find them. So for the case of small firms, we expand the cooperative model to the scale of a network. A co-op network allows small firms to join together to compete with larger firms working to build collective power. Forming a co-op network allows small firms to share critical support infrastructure while expanding professional, economic, and political capabilities. The network provides members with the essential tools to run a practice. And within the network, firms can share resources, thereby leveraging the economies of scale. And this is a great way to extend reach as well. Small firms have their own distinct advantages, such as working relationships with communities and the ability to experiment and innovate. But the network can help connect firms with potential project partners, community organizations, and activists, while helping to build a broader cooperative economy that's really rooted in collective power.
There are a number of reasons why now is a great time to start or transition to the cooperative model. We've discussed the large number of baby boomers reaching retirement and economic instability. Other considerations include challenging developer models, distributing surplus more equitably, and being a part of a larger workers' movement. Later, we'll go into detail with more reasons why cooperatives are the change we need in our workplaces. Next, Gabe will introduce cooperative principles and various types of cooperatives.
Yeah. Thanks, Chase. Thanks, Martha. So on your screen, you can see the Rochdale Principles, basically a distillation that helps define what we mean when we say cooperative. As we'll continue to learn today, there are many types of cooperatives suited to many sectors and approaches to business. So what you see here are basically the most crucial commonalities. And I added in gray a few words about what these each mean in practice. We've already talked about 1 and 2 a little bit, the democratic principles, including one worker, one vote, and the emphasis on openness and equality among workers. You'll notice that some of these, especially number 3, are actually restrictive. As workers are empowered by ownership and a share in the success of the whole business, this is also actually carefully limited such that the capitalist mechanisms of speculation and extraction are not possible. Number 4 protects from any business agreement or other device that would affect the autonomy of democratic control. And 5, 6, and 7 are really about a shared cooperative philosophy and attitude in the world. So education and training on cooperative democracy, both within and outside the workplace, really important. Cooperation with other co-ops whenever possible in order to boost each other's success. And a community-driven approach that treats the local context as a site for cooperation and embetterment rather than a resource for extraction. So what is a cooperative? Here are some of the types of cooperatives. Here I'm basically offering some of the standard types that as they exist today. I'll go through these each to give you a sense of some of the most common approaches. So the first, the consumer purchasing cooperative. A consumer purchasing co-op basically helps members band together for purchasing power so they can access high quality specialty or essential goods of some kind. These service-oriented groups are some of the most common and well-known co-ops that exist today. Grocery co-ops allow members reduced prices, and they often operate at least partly on required member labor hours. Another important example of this type are groups that provide niche items to a certain group, such as textbooks for students or equipment for mountaineers. This type of co-op is also often a kind of a central hub for the reuse economy and other shared services. Another very common type of cooperative is the producer or marketing co-op. These groups of similar small businesses band together to work out better distribution channels, production standards, and aggregate together other common needs while also establishing a shared identity and brand. Many of the agricultural cooperatives on the right hand of your screen are, of course, very recognizable brands, and that's really exactly the point of this kind of co-op. So next kind, a worker-owned or industrial cooperative. It's basically a tried and true format for equitable distribution of decision-making, organization, and working conditions within a single shop or workplace. This emerged in parallel with the Industrial Revolution, so it has a really rich history. The industrial cooperative movement in England really defined what cooperatives can do and, for example, established those Rochdale Principles I reviewed earlier. Nowadays, your local bike shop, cafe, or specialty contractor might use this system to self-manage and deal with succession. And also now we're seeing professional consultant groups also using this model, engineering firms, infrastructure and planning, and other larger consulting groups. So another type, a housing cooperative, are also kind of having a moment, which is nice via the co-housing movement. This has seen groups of families and individuals at a small to medium scale pool resources to build themselves a shared solution for housing. The observation that an equitable or non-commodity cooperative approach to the universal need of housing is not itself new. For example, on the left side, you see the 15,372 unit co-op city in the Bronx, which has a strong parallel with organized union labor practices in 1960s New York City. So yeah, on many different scales here. So a multi-stakeholder cooperative, kind of a catch-all. So for them, housing is one of the many services that some of these much larger multi-stakeholder cooperatives provide. These basically equitably deal with the complex multi-sector situations that arise when a particular corporation's economy really shapes many other aspects of their locality. And so these are basically solidarity focused to provide services, for example, to people or neighborhoods that would normally be skipped by a profit-driven enterprise that would be fulfilling the same function. For example, the logging industry region in Quebec, the Mondragon industry in Spain, and the large healthcare group in Minnesota. So I synthesized a little bit on this slide, kind of the essentials here, adding a few main takeaways for the overview of these types. So basically, all of the examples that I've given tap into economies of scale and logistics without the hierarchy of profit, class-based leadership and control, or the capitalist mechanisms of speculation and extraction. So I think that's really crucial. They also provide a shared identity and a collective political power and a voice, enabling person-to-person needs as transparently as possible, be it collaborations, transactions, logistics, or other services. These are all mutual aid oriented and community focused, both internally and externally. And lastly, they really all believe in the transformative power of the cooperative mentality. So from here, Palmira will take it over, giving a more in-depth sector-based case study. So, thanks.
Sorry, I was muted. So one thing we just sort of learned from Gabe is that cooperatives are everywhere. Some of the largest co-ops in the US can be found in the agriculture, grocery, hardware and lumber, energy, healthcare, and finance industries. And here are some examples that you might recognize the names of, some of which Gabe also featured earlier. But there are many other kinds of co-ops, also as Gabe pointed out: insurance, housing, co-ops in pharma, media, engineering, architecture, construction, and they really vary in size from very small to large, and also in reach from local to national. But as Gabe sort of hinted, for the next few minutes, I'm actually going to focus on a single industry and not one of the usual suspects that I just mentioned, to illustrate not only how effective cooperatives can be as a business model, but also to underline the incredible variety that can exist in modes of organization, even within the co-op model itself. Of the 4 case studies that I will discuss, 3 are already existing co-ops and 1 is an aspiring co-op in the field of architecture. So the choice of media as an industry to highlight was deliberate because, like architecture, it is a creative discipline and one that has been transformed radically by technology. Media is often also seen as a dying field, but the case studies I'm going to bring up so that both mainstream and sort of not so mainstream, as well as sort of established emerging outlets, have looked to co-ops as an organizational model that can guarantee their long-term survival in this very difficult industry. So I'd like to start with an entity that we're probably all very familiar with, but don't all know is in fact a cooperative. The Associated Press is a behemoth of the media industry and in fact a co-op. Today, the AP operates more than 200 news bureaus around the world, and AP news reports are used by more than 1,700 newspapers and 5,000 broadcasters worldwide. The AP was founded in 1846 in New York City by 5 print newspapers pooling their resources to cover the cost of transmitting information during the Mexican-American War. Its membership has grown and expanded over the years. And so today it's owned not just by its contributing newspapers, but also by radio and television stations across the United States. Those members both contribute local stories to the AP and use material written by the AP's staff. Many newspapers and broadcasters actually outside of the US are also our AP subscribers. They pay a fee to use AP material without being contributing members of the cooperative. The AP is often considered kind of outside classification, but I think it can be likened to a consumer co-op. It's essentially a group of consumers, in this case, media outlets that need access to information, and they band together to create content that can be shared by all of them. Another interesting example of a co-op in the media industry is the Magnum Photos Agency. Magnum was founded in 1947 by 4 pioneering photographers of the time and currently has 44 members based around the world. In their own words, they are a community who practice independently, share ideas, and sometimes create work together. In addition to being a community, Magnum also functions as an agency, though not an exclusive one. It represents its members for assignments globally, licenses existing work, places their works in exhibitions, and sells fine prints through their galleries. The organization can even represent the work of a photographer after their death on agreement with their estate representative. During their tenure, however, members are entitled to sell their work on their own and through other galleries or to seek commercial work through alternative routes. Membership in Magnum is highly selective. It is a minimum 4-year process and is considered an accolade in a photographer's career. As a producer / marketing co-op, Magnum leverages its selective membership and subsequently the high quality of work and professionalism of its members to further its mission. The next example is Defector Media. Those of you who are sports fans might be aware of the sports blog Deadspin. Defector was actually formed by Deadspin writers that quit en masse in 2019 after company executives tried to limit their editorial freedom. Their resignation got a lot of press, and Defector racked up more than 10,000 subscribers on the first day it was announced in January 2020, an indication that this enterprise would prove financially viable after all. According to members of Defector, belonging to a union while at Deadspin really helped prepare them for the next step of setting up a co-op. For them, co-ops are the next evolution after a unionized workplace. Defector is a worker-owned cooperative with 20-something employees. And in the spirit of the Rochdale Principles that Gabe discussed, they're very open about sharing information with others who are interested in cooperatives regarding not only the story of their own constitution, but also their internal structure. And with this, I will move on to my last case study, the New York Review of Architecture, a fairly young publication in the world of architecture that is currently in the process of becoming a cooperative. So for the past couple of months, I've been working with Nicholas Kemper, who's the publisher and one of the 5 desk editors of NIRA, and Matthew Allen, a contributor and a guest editor, to define the cooperative principles that will govern the transformed organization and to arrive at a leadership and decision-making structure that will guarantee the publication's longevity as success, a tall order in the media industry, especially in the world of architecture. So NIRA is considering becoming a worker-owned cooperative, but remains open to the option of being a multi-stakeholder cooperative that would include, for example, subscribers as a different member class. It's currently staffed by editors and writers working entirely on a part-time basis, which is rather unique. And another thing that's quite unique about NIRA among architecture publication is that it compensates its contributors. By asking future co-op members to get paid in equity, in this case, non-voting stock, NIRA is not only hoping to remain financially solvent during the first very difficult years in a publication's life, but also to set up a system that tracks and ultimately, hopefully, rewards all of its members' intellectual contributions. Another goal behind the publication's cooperativization is the desire to create a lively and non-exclusive community of writers who share ideas, learn from one another, and in doing so, the publication hopes to make writing about architecture a viable career choice. The goals of our working group have been to define a clear internal structure for the co-op in order to avoid, to borrow Joe Freeman's words, the tyranny of structurelessness, but also to ensure that the organization remains fresh, that people receive training in order to transition to more senior roles of more responsibility, and that writers feel genuinely invested in this community. And so with that, I'd like to hand it over to Ashton, who will talk to us about some of the biggest co-ops that exist in the world today.
Thanks. So today we'll be looking very, very briefly at 3 case studies, one in Mondragon, Spain, one in Emilia-Romagna, Italy, and the other in Quebec, Canada. All 3 of these large kind of conglomerates of co-ops operate on the global scale today, and they're important to observe the scalable potential of cooperatives, which we often think of as rather small. We know that cooperatives are antithetical to the wage or employment system, and these case studies started where there was government disinvestment or a need in a specific sector that the larger political movement wasn't meeting. So Mondragon is a little bit better known in the United States because of the scale of the business. The Mondragon Corporation roughly matches that of large US corporations. In Emilia-Romagna, they utilized smaller to medium businesses with really strong networks. And so that model isn't as easily compared to business operations in the United States. So Mondragon was founded in 1956 out of the fascist wreckage of the Spanish Civil War. They were initially making heaters and eventually expanded into all sectors as they grew with success. They have proved that cooperatives at scale can function and support workers through business failures and recessions by relocating workers within the larger co-op to other member co-ops. Today, they are the largest cooperative in the world. They have over 81,000 member cooperatives, and they have sales in over 150 countries. In Emilia-Romagna, the first co-op started in the 1860s, and by the early 20th century, they were present in every sector. However, in the 1920s, the National Fascist Board of Cooperatives took over all of the co-ops, removed their autonomy, and effectively killed the co-ops. But after World War II in the 40s, the government recognized the value of cooperatives as a tool for an equitable economy, so they started to rebuild with some government support. Today, co-ops represent 30% of the GDP. Every 2 residents is a co-op member, and there is a pretty low unemployment rate of 4%. In Quebec, co-ops, credit unions, and insurance mutuals emerged in response to a difficulty obtaining loans. They started mainly in agriculture and finance and eventually spread to all sectors. Today, there's roughly 3,000 co-ops and mutuals, 8.6 million members, 120,000 jobs. They represent 12% of Quebec's economy and 82% of the social enterprise revenue. So how are these able to survive or thrive? We found that there are 6 points in each of these regions that have enabled the development of these co-ops. The first, government recognition. So in all of these places, co-ops are mentioned in the Constitution or in other policies. This has really laid the groundwork for government financing through low interest loans to the various cooperatives. Sectoral financing. So the co-ops themselves have created solidarity or reserve funds, which can help in times like a recession. And they receive preferential taxation or lower tax rates. They're required to form supportive infrastructure, so federations, which really allow them to support each other. And finally, looking at procurement flows, so they get preferential rights in bidding on public contracts. So now I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ashton. So in hearing about the societal conditions that enable cooperatives, I just wanted to compare this with the unfortunately countervailing example of the current American economy, and basically to our current historical moment. So as we've seen with the many platforms that are currently shaping the way that we consume media, eat, clean, shop, move around, meet romantic partners, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, these companies and their platforms or their apps that they operate are currently the strongest forces of new economical organization, as well as new conditions of labor, really shaping the way that people transact and work. And really what we've seen, especially recently with the urinating in bottles thing, that these apps quite purposefully keep labor at an arm's length, keeping the drivers and delivery workers and providers as gig workers, while they and the platform really act as the central switchboard and monitor for any and all transactions, and really taking a cut of each transaction, of course. So the Co-op Network group here, we've been closely following this platform cooperative consortium as their critique begins clearly in this place here as well. So the algorithms and procedures of these capital-driven platforms fragment labor, disallow interactions that are not transactions. And this is really all by design and quite intentional rather than by writ or by rule. So it's kind of easy for them to short circuit the actual laws in sneaky ways. So, for example, it's very hard for groups of workers to organize if the software that they all use does not have a function that allows them to communicate with each other. So the Platform Cooperative Consortium helps groups cooperativize and create their own alternative platforms, bringing the 200-year history of co-ops that we've been looking at just now to the age of digital organization and communication. Some of the groups that presented at their 2019 New York City conference that I attended, and some others from the group, were an employee-owned app-based house cleaning platform, really successful in New York. The Japanese creators of an app that enables younger people to care for and do errands for elders in their community and to receive redeemable tokens based on that. Musician owner service for music release, and many others. There's also really an incredible presentation from a platform-based Austrian cooperative for artist freelancers that solves kind of myriad needs of freelancers in the creative sectors. And we're seeing now growing cooperative alternatives for Uber, Airbnb, bicycle courier services, etc. So their guidelines for platform cooperatives are here on the screen, pertaining to the way that software and its data and algorithms are designed, managed, updated, used, etc. And so many of our group's ideas for a cooperative network for architecture are kind of rooted in these principles as we seek to define better ways for architects to join, collaborate, and work in new assemblages with the technological tools of today. So with that, I'll pass it to Matt to take a look at some examples of architectural co-ops.
Great, thanks, Gabe. So we've discussed cooperatives much more broadly and seen the cooperative model applied to other organizations and businesses in the world. So now what we're going to do is look more specifically at cooperatives in our own profession, that being architecture. So in the world at large, there are in fact many architectural cooperatives in existence, and they range the spectrum in terms of the different types of organizational models. For example, La Colle here is an architecture cooperative established in Barcelona in 2009. While an architectural cooperative, they partnered with community stakeholders to create a housing complex called La Borda, a multi-stakeholder cooperative. It involved a heavy participatory design process, which focused on both affordability as well as reducing energy demand and material and construction waste. The 28-unit housing complex is itself a cooperative of its own residents. Architeam is based in Australia, and it adopts more of a cooperative network strategy. Founded in 1991, Architeam Cooperative is a membership organization of architects working in small, medium, and emerging practices who originally banded together to form a purchasing cooperative out of a desire to lower overhead costs or other expenses, and most particularly from a desire to reduce professional indemnity and public liability insurance. The cooperative now has over 800 members. In the United States, it's a bit of a different scenario. There's an extremely small number of architecture cooperatives, and we've outlined a few of the ones that we've found. In terms of worker-owned cooperatives, Warren Street is a full-service architecture, landscape, and interior design firm based out of New Hampshire. South Mountain Company is a certified benefit corporation and worker-owned design-build cooperative based out of Martha's Vineyard. It actually transitioned to worker ownership in 1987. UXO is a worker-owned cooperative based out of the Bay Area in Northern California. And Third Place Design Cooperative is one more worker-owned co-op based out of the state of Washington. So one of the closest organizations we've come to find in terms of a purchasing co-op in the United States is the JAM Collective. They operate more as a network of small firms, primarily firm owners, who are trying to reduce costs by banding together and increasing their purchasing power. However, while they share some commonalities in terms of a shared or collective ethos, JAM is not a cooperative, and it doesn't require its members to be cooperatives. Co-Everything is an architecture firm that helps create cooperative housing projects by developing with community stakeholders. Effectively, each project is its own business entity, which becomes an architecture firm / multi-stakeholder developer cooperative. So the big question really in our research is, why are there so few architecture cooperatives in the United States? And the bottom line is that it stems from the capitalist realities in America of a system that's really been on competition over cooperation. As such, there actually is no federal designation of a cooperative. And while it's growing, not all states legally recognize cooperatives. Then there's the added difficulty of cooperating professions, which is effectively you can't create a cooperative of licensed professionals in architecture. And there's also licensure rules and regulations which differ across state lines, and legally structuring an alternative practice where there isn't such a definition. Lawyers, consultants, and lobbying is required, which is obviously time and money. However, there is regional support and legal counseling that does help in terms of if you're going to create an alternative practice in the co-op model. Because of this tremendous difficulty, we've kind of found a workaround that the cooperatives in architecture are doing, which is to function as a cooperative while legally operating under a traditional business model. So legal structures can be partnerships, limited liability companies, and S-corps, and that function and operate as co-ops by adopting co-op bylaws. So members have strict membership rules, and of course, ethics still matter, right? There's a cooperative ethos in all of these organizations. And like I said before, there is regional support and legal counseling that can help in terms of modifying your organization to adopt co-op bylaws. And the Democracy at Work Institute is one of those such organizations that we found to be very helpful.
As Martha, Chase, and Gabe indicated, there are two different kinds of cooperatives, worker-owned and co-op networks. I want to apply these now to architecture firms. Just to be clear, we believe that cooperativizing is a key to an end to the race to the bottom the competition between firms, especially small firms, currently produces. We believe that cooperativization is not just a pleasant option, but a crucial one. The structure of the worker-owned architecture firm, which again means co-ownership and one worker, one vote, does not mean a flattening of roles or lack of leadership. It just means that everyone votes on what and who constitutes leadership and what the management system will be. If the left images indicates this administration possibility, the right shows how profits are shared. It does not mean that all are paid equally. Rather, how workers are paid is decided by all. Unlike a corporation where profits are allocated by shares to owners with a percentage going automatically to the growth of the firm, workers in a co-op decide on how the reserve beyond their designated dividends is spent. In lieu of profit firm growth, this might mean supporting a community in need, support of another co-op, aid to a precarious condition of one of its members, research fellowships, R&D, anything that they think is productive to their cooperative aims. The cooperative network joins small and medium architecture firms together to allow them to perform like a larger firm while maintaining the intimacy, dexterity, and care that comes with being small. It expands the firm's access to knowledge, resources, workspaces, and fellow architectural workers. The firms that join the network ideally would be themselves worker-owned, but as these might be rare, as indicated, the joining firms would need to be themselves democratically and collaboratively constituted. The network doesn't exist to maximize profit and efficiency. Cooperativizing is an ethos, and members must be committed to the principles of cooperatives that were shared by Gabe. The motivations for the formation of the network can be different: purchasing power, marketing power, or both, or just the sharing of resources, workers, space, knowledge, support. In any case, as with the worker co-op itself, the number of firms will choose the administrative system that facilitates their cooperative aims. On the right, we can see how the cooperative architecture network, sharing resources as it does, can participate in a larger network of mutual support with other professionals we interact with and with other organizations and constituencies that ultimately are fighting the same anti-developer driven approach to our built economy. Indeed, we believe that the true goal of cooperativizing is not just the empowerment of architecture firms, which is important, but their empowerment of the community, which will be addressed by Killian and Ashton in a bit. The Architecture Lobby's co-op group, which you see represented here and those of us who are speaking, is trying to bring awareness to the advantages of cooperativization to the world of architecture. Awareness of the fact that architecture firms have more to gain by supporting each other than by competing against each other. We are doing this by a survey that asks architecture firms what they feel might be gained by collaboration and cooperation, partly so that the lobby knows what to target when we explore the mechanisms of cooperativization, but also to get firms to realize the potential of joining a cooperative network. The survey in that way is as much advocacy as it is information gathering. The Architecture Lobby is currently working directly with groups that are in the process of forming a cooperative network. For our lobby working group, these firms are the beta test for what we should know about the entire process: the bylaws, the lawyers, the support groups, the business structures, the legal prohibitions that require the workarounds that Matt has described. For these beta firms, the lobby is the place to share any and all information as we all go through the process together. Together, we form a co-op of co-ops. What you see here is the draft diagram of the organizational aspirations of one of these beta co-op networks, WIP, a group of women-led architecture firms that want to cooperativize. It is an example of all the things that need to be thought through regarding a firm's aims and how to achieve them, such as who is in, who is out, how do they get in, how do they get out? Does every firm that joins have equal status, or is there a probation period? Do the original 7 firms, those now leading the process, form a leadership board? Who makes decisions in one area of interest, say production, as opposed to another, say research? Who signs drawings and who holds responsibility and why? Design Advocates, another beta cooperative group, is a nonprofit that gathers small firms to do pro bono work for businesses hit hard by the pandemic. They want to transition away from pro bono work while also gathering firms that deliver resources for clients without means. Their organizational chart indicates distinctions that need to be made between volunteer labor and actual members, distinguishing between efforts of producing designs and those communities that organize research and support fellowships. The charts of both these groups indicate the need to think through very thoroughly all of the whys, whos, and hows of a co-op before it goes to a lawyer, which will have to be done. The lawyers can direct the co-op to the best business and legal frameworks, LLCs, S Corp, etc., but they need to know very precisely what decisions the group has made on these issues and why. So, on to Killian and Ashton and a discussion of communities.
Hello, everyone. As I said before, my name is Killian Riano, and I'm coming to you from Shaker Heights, Ohio. Next, please. So we have been looking at cooperatives, and we have been looking at them as business, as ways to do business, as new economic models. But there's also a growing model that this is democratizes both the economic system and the overall production of goods, as well as space and even civic productions around communities. Part of this has been based on some of the work that cooperatives like Mondragon have done. And here in Cleveland specifically, the Evergreen Cooperatives were formed by the Democracy Collaborative out of Baltimore, and here in Cleveland, the Cleveland Foundation, one of the biggest local funders, and the Ohio Employee Ownership Center at Kent State University. What they noticed was that the Cleveland Clinic has is one of the biggest organizations with the biggest purchasing power in this community, yet has some of the communities around it with the lowest unemployment and lowest overall economic rates in the city. So in order to solve that, they began to think about what needs does the Cleveland Clinic have as an anchor institution, and how can community-based businesses provide those. Next. So they came up with a solar cooperative for the energy, a greenhouse that grows the most beautiful lettuces you'll ever see and glows beautiful purple in the neighborhood, and as well as laundry. Next. They took this idea, the Democracy Collaborative specifically took this idea and began to think about how hospitals all around the country can take on this role, both because their mission should be about how to improve the health of the communities around them. And then next, and that means how to improve both the economic opportunities for communities, as well as the overall community spatial and community well-being. So they are working out of these health anchor networks, helping these hospitals and other anchor institutions begin to make the investments in businesses and community-based projects that will make a difference within these communities. Next. And this is both here in Cleveland, we're experiencing it at the level of the Evergreen Cooperative. There's another group called Clevelandos that is working more within the African American community specifically, but communities generally in Cleveland. And based on the history of the Black communities cooperative. On the left, we have the Wedge Community Foods and cooperatives that have been formed in Minneapolis, as well as in Black Panthers had a mutual aid and cooperative system. Here, the same Cleveland Owns is organizing communities and people in communities like Huff and Glenville to create solar cooperatives, food cooperatives, and other and housing cooperatives. Next.
Killian. So here are some examples of what's going on in the Bay Area, for example. So we have the Network of Bay Area Worker Cooperatives, or NOBOS. And it's actually an example of one of the oldest cooperative networks, started back in 1994. So some of the member co-ops would be UXO Architects, Arsmandi Bakery, Alchemy Coffee, the Cheese Board, the Sustainable Economies Law Center, Project Equity, and the Democracy at Work Institute. So the Sustainable Economies Law Center, or SELC, is like such a cooperative anchor in California. They offer free legal cafes, legal guides, and they partner with values-aligned organizations and support and even co-write cooperative legislation. They actually co-authored the California Cooperative Corporation Act in 2016. And just go back 1 second, sorry, thank you. You'll see in this diagram, they have a similar vision of those like larger kind of isometric diagrams that Killian was showing of like what a sustainable economy on the ground in Oakland could look like. Next. So the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative is actually formed out of a partnership with the SELC to create the first permanent real estate cooperative. It's essentially a community land trust model using a cooperative corporation, and it's not limited to just housing, and it's really aimed at community profit. So EBPREC is a BIPOC and Oakland native-led organization, and they're trying to keep families and money in Oakland rather than giving homes over to corporations. So as a resident of California, you can invest up to $1,000 to become what's considered a community investor, community member, and receive returns on your investment. And UXO Architects was actually fortunate enough to work with them on one of their very first projects. So another like on the ground example of this would be Cooperation Jackson. So they have a lot of endeavors underneath one larger cooperative organization. So they have community land trusts, housing co-ops, construction co-ops, recycling co-ops, and even a fabrication lab, which is Digital Fabrication Space Cooperative, and they offer academic internships. I'll pass it back to Killian and Shaheen now.
Hey everyone, so partly we're at the ACSA thinking in part of how to bring these kind of ideas, models, processes into academia as well, both as a process by which we work within our own academic circles and the kind of production we do. Next, we see a few examples of cooperatives in academia forming in architecture, mostly in response to some of the issues that we're facing right now, including economic precarity, the architecture lobby, the climate change and how we both kind of have to mitigate and begin to adapt to it in the super studio, and racial injustice in Dark Matter University. Next. The architecture lobby is launching this summer the ABC, the Architecture Beyond Capitalism Summer School. We're going to be looking at issues such as unlearning capitalist architecture, capital, labor, and product in architectural design, and changing procurement and alternative forms of cooperation. Next. The Green New Deal Super Studio has a nationwide connection of schools, over 140, all looking at how the Green New Deal, what the Green New Deal might look like in different places all over the country. So in this case, really creating a larger collective that is place-based. Next, please. And then there's Dark Matter University that I am also an organizer, as is Shaheen, and I think a couple of people here today. Dark Matter University came together last summer after the murder by the state, state violence of George Floyd. And it's a collective of BIPOC educators and designers that really saw that we needed to organize for changes in the way we design, we teach and work within design. Within a year, we have had many studios. We have taught at Tuskegee University, for example. Currently, we have a couple of structures. We have allied studios and courses, so folks within our larger network that are teaching courses that could belong to Dark Matter University. We have at least 6 universities that are running a Design Justice Fundamentals course. And I am fortunate enough to be working with landscape architect Jen Lowe on one of the first studio modules that Dark Matter University is working on, that is called Cooperative Futures, in which we're looking at the role of cooperatives in communities of color. And there's also relationships, such as right now, our friend Curry Hackett and Jerome Haffer are teaching a course between Yale and Howard University called Fugitive Practices. Next. So a little bit about Cooperative Futures. This is the course that Jen Lowe and I are teaching. Next. It's at Kent State University. It's a relationship between Kent State University, where I'm teaching in, Dark Matter University, and Carleton University. So I have 17 students, 12 of them at Carleton, actually that's 19, 7 at Kent State next. And what that has allowed us is to begin to share an infrastructure of friends, partners, and community folks that we've been bringing in. Also, our module, we always believe at Dartmouth University of having 2 teachers for every course, and usually partnering people that have similar interests, but might have different levels of experience or might just be willing to learn from each other. Our module was partnered with another module taught by Jaleesa Bloomberg and Curry Hackett, co-4 that explore African-American arts, movements, and performance as a way of creating space on our studio looking. Both of them sited in Cleveland. Next. And what that has allowed us, like I said, is to bring Cleveland Owns, the radical cooperative network here in Cleveland, Third Space Action Lab, a group that does amazing design strategy work around Cleveland, specifically in African-American communities, and 12 Literary Arts, a literature group that is creating a youth cooperative that is beginning to reimagine Huff and other communities and have a larger constellation of partnerships and friendships. Next. The work now, the students are hard at work producing urban farming cooperatives, transportation cooperatives that are multimodal and solve the issue that a lot of drivers for Uber don't want to pick up people in African-American neighborhoods. We have a community land trust. We have a solar power series of parks. All these different, really working in looking at how the form and the cooperative model can come together and how that changes the way we work with the studio. Next. Also, it was important for us to base it on people. So the student, and to negotiate, because one of the most important things, as Peggy was describing, is the negotiation and relationships necessary for cooperatives. So the students began to study specific sectors within the community of Huff. Then they would negotiate with the projects with each other, negotiating either formal, cooperative, or other siting ideas and coming up with new ones. So at the end, everyone's projects had a little bit of the DNA of everybody's with a cooperative process within it. Thank you.
And so we've also been experimenting with cooperative models in research, and I'll just share a quick vignette from one such cooperative to illustrate some of the benefits of challenging the more competitive and hierarchical models of research that many of us have been socialized into. The Dissent by Design Collective is dedicated to studying ways designers engage in contentious politics. And as a small group of 3 undergrads and 1 advisor and 1 faculty member, a few years ago, we set out to conduct ethnographic fieldwork with unstructured interviews and participant observation around activism. And we traveled to cities where groups of architects were organizing, protesting, boycotting, or participating in other forms of dissent. While the initial direction of the project was faculty driven, the collective soon took over. And after one of our first field trips, which parenthetically was to New York for the AIA convention and the Architecture Lobby Thinking, the undergraduate members of the group proposed the creation of a book of poetry as a form of expression and disseminating their analysis from our fieldwork. And that book became the platform upon which they organized a panel on race and gender equity. This was as part of AIAS Forum. And that was run and organized by the undergraduate members of the cooperative with support from the broader collective. As the collective gained experience and members, we moved to design an exhibit on colorblind racism in architecture last year, which went up in February. And in the aftermath of some of the reactions to and coverage of that exhibit, the collective then moved on to create a digital platform for the dissemination of collages that were intended to provoke questions around racism in space. And this work continues today alongside sort of our ethnographic work, our writing, and as well as a cooperative senior undergraduate studio that's taking place right now. And so across this, with members in design, environmental design, architecture and planning, as well as sociology, the cooperative includes undergrads, recent alums, so students have graduated from the institution and maintained their role in the cooperative, as well as grad students and faculty. And the group collectively shares in research design, in collective authorship. And also something that was surprising for us were really impactful forms of membership that came up across the cooperative as this network of individuals, as opposed to sort of like the more tiered and structured forms of membership that, you know, coming up as a student and as a faculty member now, I've been used to. At the same time as these really, you know, exciting aspects that these cooperative forms of research have presented to us, we're also navigating around some ways, some of the institutional and bureaucratic barriers to working as a cooperative in academia. For example, we're encountering pressure from a book club publisher on listing the faculty member as the author of a book project that we're exploring. Or for tenure and promotion, there are norms about lead authorship that we're getting a lot of pressure about, but which we continue to ignore. We'll see how that goes. Anyhow, this is just a quick snapshot. These are some of the merits and the challenges of cooperativizing research that this small group has encountered. And we're certainly eager to carry this conversation forward in the breakout to learn about others' experiments in collectivizing research in some forms, whether it's as a cooperative or otherwise. Killian, I'll pass it back to you.
And we just wanted to leave it with a couple of questions, because going to a cooperative model changes relationship. It changes the way that we teach students and the relationship to each other. There's the student relationship to us, faculty, and faculty administration. I think for example, one thing that we've talked about is, for example, how does a cooperative model, an embracing one, change things like tenure and these kind of crediting and authorship issues that Shaheen just brought up. Thank you.
All right, so now we're going to give a brief summary of part one. Cooperatives are everywhere and they operate at many scales. Even though they are more common in other parts of the world, the US still lacks a strong cooperative culture. Now that's for a number of reasons mentioned before, one of them being federal designation, although there are workarounds. The architecture lobby and other organizations are working to raise awareness while also creating solutions. The cooperative is an alternative to the competitive model that results from a capitalist system that divides workers instead of encouraging collective engagement. At its heart, the architecture profession thrives when there's a shared effort, not only within specific architecture firms, but also with our related disciplines.
So we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we will break into groups to discuss cooperative modes of thinking and how they apply to ProPrac, studio, theory, practice, and research. And we'll just take a brief moment now to for each group to introduce their topic. So ProPrac.
Yeah, so I think we're trying to have a very informal conversation in our group. Matthew and I are moderating. The main question, the big umbrella question we'll try to answer is, do we teach the practice we have, or do we teach the practice we want? And how do we go about doing that? Just to say that neither Matthew nor I actually teach ProPrac. We are both practitioners and educators. We teach studio actually, but we thought this was a really important session to have. And in preparation for this, we've sort of reached out to faculty in different schools and sort of tried to familiarize ourselves with ProPrac syllabi that are sort of currently being taught in schools around the US.
I feel like I already spoke about some things around studio. I do count with the pleasure of having some students from the Kent State studio here today, so they'll be able to share some experiences from the student perspective. And Martha, I don't know if you have some other thoughts.
Yeah, I think just continuing that discussion that you started earlier, and you know, introducing the role of co-op and studio, communicating with community, and sharing experiences.
For theory, Christian Rutherford, who's the man behind the scenes and changing our slides, Christian and I will be talking about the maybe not logical intersection of theory with co-ops, but we feel that theory plays a huge role in actually redirecting how we think about the subjects of theory, but also how it is that theoretical discussions and critiques, institutional critiques, are a large part of what motivates the interest in cooperativization and moves that work against a developer-driven economy.
And for practice, Gabe and I will be kind of having a question and answer, open conversation with folks that think that, you know, what they do is practice, whether you split your time with academia or you have another type of practice. We have some questions about what your practice looks like, what a practice looks like, and what a potential network of practices could look like.
Last but not least, Chase and I will be hosting a conversation around research, and really we want to sort of mine the experiences in the room, but also think critically about what would cooperative models of research look like within sort of like traditional academic research, but also beyond those formats and those norms, thinking about things from funding to authorship to research design, as well as other aspects of research and research by cooperatives and about cooperatives. So that'll be that last breakout group.
Okay, so just briefly to go over some things about the break rooms. In each breakout room, we'll be using progressive stack to moderate discussion. So if you'd like to speak, type stack in the chat, and the moderator will call people in the order in which they signed up, unless someone has already spoken a lot, in which case the moderator reserves the right to call on those underrepresented individuals. Since this may not work for some breakout rooms and some of the conversations that we may want to have, we may shift to more organic conversation if needed, and that's up to each group. Also, Zoom now gives participants the option to choose their own breakout room rather than having it be assigned. So when we get back from the break, Danielle, our ACSA organizer, will enable the breakout rooms, and you'll see an icon at the bottom of your screen. It kind of looks like a window, and you'll be able to click that and then see the breakout room of your choice. And then if you click that, it'll take you to your room. And thanks, and we'll see you after the break.
I guess
yeah, when are we reconvening?
Yeah, so I think we did really great time, which means we have more time for the workshops, which I think is great. So let's break until 3:25, just to sort of stay with the idea of 15-minute break. That's my time, I'm Central, so 4:25 Eastern. Exactly, thank you for doing that, Killian. So we'll all reconvene here at 4:25, and as you just heard, you can select the group that you'd like to be in. So we'll see you very soon.
Thank you.
I think maybe some of us got cut off kind of abruptly, so apologies that sometimes the rooms just close down in a minute and you don't realize. So I don't know if we have everybody, but we can probably get started. I hope everybody had really productive conversations. They felt a little short, to be honest. I feel like we were getting somewhere and that's just when we got cut off, but maybe it's nice to reconvene and all talk together. So I don't want this to take too much time because it'd be nice to have a conversation, but maybe we can have a brief summary from each group about the things that were discussed. So Matt, do you want to, should I do it? Okay. So it's really hard to summarize our conversation because it's gone all over the place. But I guess there was agreement we need to rethink the way we sort of practice first. There were a lot of practitioners actually in our group, and that starts in school and the way we teach it. And please, sort of, I miss things or I misrepresent, anybody in our group chime in. There seemed to be agreement that we certainly need to be teaching more than we currently are in school, both to prepare students for the practice we currently have, as well as the practice we want. And, NAB accreditation was mentioned as something that's kind of restrictive. Similarly, licensing in AXP is restrictive in terms of sort of where you go once you graduate. Models were sort of proposed where we sort of transform into a medical school sort of model where there's a residency, a structured residency, and a lot of sort of that learning is actually happening in that model. And examples of schools that have a co-op model and sort of intersperse teaching and practice were also mentioned. There's generally a lot of interest in exploring alternative forms of practice, both within practice and within the university. And then, Jacob was mentioning that technology is actually supplanting a lot of the knowledge, the quantifiable knowledge that we get tested on in order to become licensed. And sort of, very soon we'll even have to sort of answer questions of what makes us architects, what distinguishes us from other professionals. And so I guess we ended on essentially saying that the larger question of professionalization or deprofessionalization of architecture is actually a fertile sort of starting point for conversation, even though I think none of us really have our minds made up on that one. And I guess the last point is to sort of really engage with the student psychology and try to understand what creativity means, how it's fostered, and how you kind of what the conversation about co-ops has been all about. How do you foster investment, real investment, and also a sense of agency while sort of setting up a much more cooperative model in school that doesn't take away, doesn't make you sort of, doesn't really sort of like continue with this idea of sort of the genius lone architect, but also sort of really keeps students interested. So I know I went all over the place, but our conversation was sort of really fertile and also sort of went all over the map. So I hope this did justice to some of the points that were raised. And we can go to the next group, which is studio, I believe.
Hi, my name is Claire and I teach at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, and we had a great discussion in the studio breakout room. And so we collectively put together a summary of our discussion. So I'm just going to read that off to you all. We started off learning about the Cleveland Urban Design Collaborative, which is Kent State's Community Design Center, and hearing Killian's perspective as a teacher and also for students shared their experiences. And the bottom line of that, I think, which was very clear, was that we learned, of course, there's value in cooperation in studio. And one of the points about that really resonated for all of the students was that collaboration and cooperation reflects real life. And so shouldn't it be part of our studio environments? As I get bombarded by my cat, sorry. We also teased out some of the collaborative, the differences in the terms collaborative, collective, and cooperative, although there's still a little bit of confusion about those. Some of those words describe how we work, and others talk about cooperative models and practices that challenge ownerships, labor practices, etc. So I think, there's definitely more discussion to be had about, how the collaborative, collective, and cooperative get infused into studios and become part of the studio ethos. Student-initiated design work can be a means of empowerment. So collaboration allows individuals to develop their own voices. And we talked about different ways of structuring studio design prompts so that they offer opportunities for students to lead their own or initiate some of their own programs and sites and so forth, so that they're the ways in which those collective models get played out can also serve to empower individuals. And we discussed how collective and collaborative studios might be structured differently for various year levels and curricula. So a grad level studio might look a little bit different than a second year undergraduate studio. And anyone from the group's welcome to chime in.
Next.
What group is next?
Theory. Yes.
Luke, I think you are maybe willing to talk to this? Or
Oh,
no?
I was gonna let Christian.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go.
Christian, do you want to go or do you want me to give an overview?
Sure. I mean, we structure a conversation, or we tried to structure a conversation around 3 scales. And so we looked at sort of co-op as curriculum, and then sort of looked at how the learning environment and looking at co-ops in that context. And I think there was a lot of interest in sort of trying to understand the relationship of a kind of how something is taught, or how we are discussing a certain subject, and the sort of hierarchies embedded in a learning environment that sort of model or socialize or pattern certain relationships, and how we engage with them in the profession. And so, yeah, Luke, do you want to add anything? Or anyone else in the group?
I could say, I found it just a wonderful sort of tour of different ideas about the role of collaborative practice in relation to things like privilege and sort of social and racial justice issues, and it was very theory very applicable to our current moment, I guess.
Thank you. I think research is up next.
Well, I think Katie's going to share back for us.
I'm gonna try to. It's there are a lot of stream of consciousness notes, so I'm gonna try to cover some of the highlights. We had a good mix of some students and some more kind of academic research roles in our group. So let's see. Some of the things we talked about. So a big theme was the kind of democratization of research, and finding ways to either kind of share power or give more leadership roles to the communities we work with, kind of decentering the architecture school or us as kind of professionals or academics. And a lot of the conversation around that centered around language and how we speak about particularly architectural research. It can be really opaque. And so finding ways to open up discussions and, develop a language that is less exclusionary seems pretty key to finding a way to work more cooperatively, especially with, I think a lot of us are either in kind of studio formats or, I work with Killian at the CEDC in Cleveland. So kind of a hybrid of a research and community design practice. So we also talked about, finding ways to be more flexible with the structures around those kind of educational models that, the cycles of studios and the kind of demands of tenure and all these things, they don't really take into account the actual community needs or kind of different audiences, what their timelines or needs are. So finding ways to start to pick those apart and put together new models. What else am I missing? I'm sure a lot.
I think that was awesome. We have, if you guys want, we could read through our 3 pages of single space notes, but I thought that captures a lot of it. It's awesome.
And last but not least, practice, which I I think there was some confusion between pro-prac and practice, but we sorted it by the end of the breakout session.
Yeah, I was one of the defectors from the pro practice group. So I'll add my piece. I'm kind of like Katie, you know, trying to think about how to kind of bring all this together. I thought about something my dad said years ago before I had my son. He was just talking about raising kids, and he said you raise your kids one of two ways, either exactly how you were raised or the exact opposite. So I think that brings us into, you know, we're all looking at how to deconstruct this firm model. And we're either looking at, okay, it's a little rough around the edges, we can smooth some things out, or, you know what, it's built upon pure evil, it's burned it down, right? I choose violence, like Cersei would say, right? So when we look at those things, I think at the end of it, of what we all said, I kind of thought about, obviously, well, how I come to this, but also what I'm hearing. I think it's kind of two areas, one in corporate structure, and how do we form these things? One thing I said earlier in the session is that I don't want to feel like I'm just looking for, I'm thinking that, you know, me and my group of colleagues, you know, friend colleagues, we're just trying to be another firm, but thinking we're going to be a cooperative. But how do we really formalize these things? And I think what's available through different states, as was mentioned, in, I think presently in California and Colorado, they do offer those corporate structures. So I think seeing how, if you're going to have to be a LLC, but how you can form your bylaws was also mentioned, but really how do you operate? How do you function? How do you kind of, if it's just a mental thing that you have to trick yourself into thinking you're operating different, if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. But hopefully in time, those corporate structures will allow for a little bit more flexibility. The other areas in contract structure, and I think part of how, you know, obviously, you know, you get a contract for a project and then all the different roles are assigned to it with all different fee levels and everything. You know, if you have 6 people to tie into that, well, you know, why do you get to be principal making, you know, $180 an hour and I'm billed out at, you know, CAD drafter at $29.50, you know, so how do those things add up? And if you look into different aspects of revenue sharing, profit sharing at the end of the day, maybe that'll righten the ship, or, but then what if there's no profit on the job? Then how do, you know, how does that work? So I think, one of the things I mentioned to one of the people in the group, you know, who seems to have an opportunity with the developer, you know, we all, if that's the core revenue stream, and then whatever you do with however you divvy that up, however the funds are disseminated, then maybe, you know, that's how you can bring in some of this cooperative thinking. That's one way. But another way is if we're just, you know, an LLC, you know, if the cooperative is the LLC and we put our good feelings up here and kind of get this structured a certain way, but I still work on my own, I still have whatever else I'm doing on the side. So I don't have to depend on the LLC to eat, but then we can worry about, okay, yeah, we want this to go great and we want it to be wonderful, but at the end of the day, it is just its own entity. I don't want to act like I'm talking on both sides of my mouth, but maybe that's how things need to be. I don't know. So yeah, those are the biggest things, thinking about, you know, kind of like a Venmo type of, you know, trading services and fees back and forth. So you're not just, you don't have necessarily a balance sheet, but you know that things are going to happen. You know you're going to help them out with that. You know, scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, whatever it takes. Think about terms of collective bargaining, revenue sharing, as I said. I think also with a larger number of people, as opposed to just, you know, your sole proprietor company going after, you know, for insurance, as Autumn was talking about, whatever it is, whether it's insurance, whether it's healthcare, each of these things, you can, you know, start to negotiate with a larger number of people. I think also, I believe Ali was a young lady talking about, you know, aligning with the overall brand. I think that's key to a cooperative. I think as she's looking for, and as I've thought about, you know, we all see firms for what they are, and if they're all, you know, built upon pure evil, as I said, it is what it is, you know, the devil you know, right? But I think we all would love to see a company that aligns with our core values, that really is who we are. And if it takes us to create that, then hey, you know, I'm ready to sign up. But I think there has to be, and hopefully there will be in time, models that align with that aim. And so yeah, if anyone else in the group has anything else to offer, please feel free. But I think we're all looking for the same thing and hoping it'll get there in time.
I think as Gabe wrote in the chat, we're sort of open to conversation now that everybody has sort of reported back, and we'll be observing Stack. So if you want to say anything, you can type Stack, and we'll call on you. And I guess in the absence of somebody typing Stack, I'll try to get us started by saying that this confusion between pro-prac and practice, which we're somewhat anticipating, was also interesting in the sense that I think our pro-prac breakout ended up not talking about pro-prac as much as we thought we were going to, and a lot of the conversation ended up really being about practice. So I'm curious how many of the groups found that the conversation was sort of structured around a theme, but then tended to sort of go in different directions and really touch on other subjects as well.
I guess I'll talk just for the sake of talking, because we also, you know, being in the practice group, we also had that, like, wait, is this like my profession, like, because professional practice often I think is like goes hand in hand with like the actual work, like how are you actually working, and that's how we kind of got into that conversation about like, well, all the other added things that we have to take into account that it goes alongside with business in this country. So yeah, it was like, how do you actually do your work when you're worried about all of these other things? And that's how, you know, going back to the cooperative versus collective versus the other one that came up as well. And I think it would be good to maybe have like those definitions, I think, available to really, I think, hone in on and what the differences between those are, and starting to highlight different ways and means and methods that you can get work done.
So I think, oh, sorry. I think Joy has a quick comment, and then Peggy's on the stack. So.
I was just going to ask if there was note takers in other groups, if any of them are willing to paste their URLs into the chat, so anyone who wanted to could read through some of the conversations we missed.
Peggy?
Just around Palmira's question of whether we found ourselves talking about things other than what our subject matter was. I think, yes, and I'll just say where our group maybe wandered away from theory, although we were kept trying to think of this also as a theoretical question, was really the institutions that need to be rethought in order for us to do the cooperative work, either in the school, in the community, or in practice. And so institutions like NAAB and NCARB, NAB limiting what, you know, what's taught and what's accredited, NCARB about professional things, and that in some way these institutions need to be rethought. But once we went into institutional mode, everything was about breaking hierarchies or breaking silos, and that's a pretty broad conversation.
Stack is open, so if anyone feels moved.
I guess I'm just looking also to understand the collective goal that everybody had from attending today. Being a little bit from an outside perspective of having found this in a way accidentally, I teach as well as practice architecture, but yet was anticipating this was more about the business side of a cooperative and how we might join or where this might exist as a format. or it feels more like it's an interest and an opportunity people are exploring, but not yet practicing per se. I don't know if the organization has one that's actually an architectural co-op that's in operation. Does that summarize some questions? And then I also see that we have a lot of academic interest more than just professional practice side, which is interesting too.
Yeah, I'll try to answer your question, Kyle, which is that this is part of the ACSA annual conference, and
thank you.
As a result, we have done workshops that have a slightly sort of different focus, but we really wanted to open it up to also the teaching of some of these things. Hence, why there's a heavy emphasis on that aspect. And I hope that sort of resonated with our audience today. But as members of the architecture lobby, many of us are practitioners, and we are very practically interested in this. Ashton has a co-op, actually. Autumn is part of the JAM collective. Many of us are trying to work cooperatively and have sort of considered and sort of try to go after projects together, even though we haven't formed an entity. Many of us are across different state lines, and that's another sort of thing that's sort of not, making it harder for us to form cooperatives. And I think one of the things that we've all been learning through this process is it actually takes a lot of effort, as Peggy was trying to say, and sort of in our effort to work with WIP and design advocates. It's a really long process. It requires a lot of familiarity with the people that you are going to be cooperating with. And that's something that, taking into account all of the legal hurdles, takes a little bit of time. But we're absolutely, as a group, I think, interested both practically and theoretically in this.
Nice. Thank you.
May I go? Sorry, I had a little family thing, but Kyle, that's a great question and a collective question. I think all of us come at it from different purposes. I wanted to hear more. I mean, I've been teaching around cooperatives, looking at them, working in them specifically in communities of color, and interested to see how we can bring them more collectively to education. And education has a set of issues. It has structural issues. So one of the questions is that I have for folks is, if everyone is interested in these sets of things, yet sometimes either it's structured because students just don't like group work, or because this or because of that, or tenure, whatever it is, what do these processes do affect anything? So that's one bucket, one reason why I'm interested in this specific conversation. The other thing, to answer the earlier question around, which might be related to what we talked about, is we actually talked a lot about individuality, especially in the context of studio. And one of the things that I was sharing is that I've taught everything from undergrad to grad. I have been doing a lot of experiments teaching on cooperatives in Queens and Hunts Point in the Bronx and Brooklyn, now in Cleveland and Warren, Ohio. And how I oscillate consistently within individual work and relationship that is not about collective group work, and that those words that don't really match with me, but really that it's about negotiation, it's about conflict, it's about working together, and then both communal and personal responsibility within the larger collective. So that's one issue that I think we talked a lot about, is kind of that fear of losing control of in our case specifically, studios, and how to create both a framework for these things to happen and the freedom for students to then explore both what they're interested in personally and together with other small groups of different sizes.
So we have Ted and Luke on stack in that order.
Okay, I guess I'll just make a quick summary in saying that, in our group, we talked about a number of things. One of the interests that I have is how we look at a new model, if you will, for the built environment's delivery, or how we have people out there that are interested in participating in some fashion, and they may not fit into some of the other professions, but what is the architect's role, or what's the opportunity within the profession? And as we see an enormous growth of population on the planet and all the issues we're currently facing, I think there's just an amazing number, and I will use the word amazing because I am amazed by the scale at which the challenges that we face are presenting themselves to us, especially recently. And I think it's a very telling one. I think that we're sort of being forced to look at, how we live on the planet, and for humankind, how do we improve it and bring all of society to the equation. And so I think architecture is broad enough and has the clarity, I think, to participate in roles that brings all the disciplines together and to participate in building our world better. I'll leave it at that.
Just to add a little bit to what Ted said, I think we did talk a little bit about, questions of new challenges presented to the profession, and also, so the reason I think that's relevant here, I guess I was hoping to ask if anyone has had experience with not just setting up permanent cooperatives, but with any sort of nonce or ad hoc cooperative arrangements.
Other than a crazy startup situation? Yeah.
I mean, I guess to me, it's a question related to how nimble practice can be, or should be, or will need to be, as we confront, I mean, look at the supply chain issues we've been witnessing over the past year, right? And the trickle, effects of things like that. I was hoping, I guess, if people have participated in specifically in temporary or kind of improvisational collaborations or whatever, if anyone would be willing to share a story.
Maybe Lotus, because she hasn't talked yet.
Hi, everybody. Yes, Luke, to answer your question, I started a design build firm to kind of create opportunities for collaboration. I collaborate with other architects that have their own independent practices to kind of expand my capacity and to do projects with. Everybody, however, has their own kind of independent structure. So it's more of I think, a collective rather than a cooperative. And then as a contractor, that is by its very nature is a collaborative process. So, subcontracts and contractors, and I'm not self-performing. So, everyone I bring in kind of has to be on board with the vision that I have for the firm and the role of the design through that process. So I think in some ways I think there's a lot of existing kinds of relationships that really do have cooperation and collaboration at their core, that we don't necessarily need to redefine them all or create invent new ways of being within our own businesses. I think it's more challenging and it's more necessary, but just for the delivery of projects in the world, recognizing the collaboration at its front and creating our contracts in our own projects, whether that's, a classic IDP contract or something that's more specific, already can create the kinds of exchanges that I think a lot of us are interested in if we can hold that and communicate at the front.
So we're at 6 o'clock, but we have 2 people on the stack, Peggy and Killian, and then maybe pass it back to Palmira for a quick wrap up after that.
Just to answer Lou's question, one of the firms that I was talking about in my presentation, Design Advocates, is very much what you're saying. They were a group that came together spontaneously when it was recognized that restaurants in particular were suffering in the pandemic and needed to very quickly build that outdoor, quote unquote, outdoor room and other things. And so they quickly formed this cooperative group in a non-legal way, and quickly then made themselves a nonprofit. And so that was really working within their networks, people that they knew from school or knew from professional colleagues, and just to say, part of the motivation in formalizing that in a cooperative is also getting a larger network so that it's not just the casual, I know somebody who might be interested, blah, 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 blah. And in some way, that is what the lobby is trying to do, is create the place where you can have those conversations that can be informal, but also, if you want to formalize them, advice around that.
And similarly, I wanted to answer Luke's question. So I have a practice called Design Agency. It's more an art, architectural, urban design practice. And I about 5 years ago decided that I no longer ever wanted to hire people, that I instead wanted to use my own LLC as a way of creating collaboratives for specific projects. So I've done that for specific things. For example, Van Allen had a project with the National Park Service. We came together and we called ourselves Performing Parks, created our own kind of bylaws in a way, and how we share credit, how we talk, to set the stage again, conflicts, negotiations, and not conflicts, big ones, but little ones, and making sure that everyone's happy. But then now I'm working on another one actually to begin to work on potentially the housing cooperatives, live work cooperatives called the Trust Belt. And what that has allowed me is to create structures where peers are working together and where I can bring artists, oral historians, psychologists, a whole bunch of other people to projects in a very nimble way.
So I think since we closed Stack and we're a few minutes over, we'll wrap it up here. But we want to thank you again for being here with us and for having these conversations and for staying through what's a very long workshop. I think Gabe posted in the chat sort of the sign up for our newsletter if you'd like to stay informed, which would be really amazing. As Peggy mentioned, we are trying to sort of be the co-op of co-ops, sort of the place where you go for information and where you meet other people. But many of us are also sort of actively trying to pursue a lot of these threads in our practice and in teaching. And so even if you come just for the conversation or to sort of meet like-minded people, we would really love to have you in sort of our meetings or even just sort of as an audience for the newsletters. So once again, thank you for today. This was really lovely. I think we all really enjoyed ourselves. So great to see you, and hopefully we'll see each other soon in person at some ACSA conference or somewhere else.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone.
Have a great weekend.
Much
Yeah.
appreciated.
Enjoy the weekend.